Hi. I wanted to revisit some points that I think I missed in the last video, and that's what I'm going to concentrate on this video about, is these points about arguing and emotion and how to get through to someone when trying to convince someone of the truth, and arguing for something and trying to overcome these barriers that you obviously have to overcome in people, especially emotional ones. And I wanted to discuss two different kinds of, I would say, stupidity or intelligence, or things that you have to overcome, these two different levels of things that you might have to overcome or consider when it comes to emotions and people's reactions to certain things based off of pure ignorance. I would say the two levels that you have to really consider when it comes to convincing people of some kind of truth, because that's the thing you're obviously implying here the most, is trying to convince someone of the truth and the facts and realities in the discussion, is talking about things like emotional strength and people's ability to even though it's right in front of them, accept the truth even though it's emotionally uncomfortable or it contradicts something that someone has obviously believed in the past, or just their experiences in general. It's something that they have to overcome, and it goes back to this whole thing about um, disconnecting the fantasies that people have from reality. You have to bring the reality discussion to a reality. When you're talking about philosophy, you have to bring the reality discussion and the philosophical discussion to these arguments. You can't bring anything else. You can still disconnect your fantasy, sort of like you could still drink your chocolate milkshake, even though you go over the amount that you can eat per day. You can still have your cheat day. You can still indulge in your fantasy, but you still have to live in reality. And when you're dieting or whatever it is, doing something like that, I think you pretty much have to stay in reality to make sure that everything stays according to the way it's supposed to stay. So when you're dealing with reality, especially with something like that, obviously you have to consider all the reality when you're constantly in thinking about these making these considerations. So yes, emotional strength. You obviously have to overcome some of these emotional barriers, and you have to. It's about disconnecting from your fantasy and these fantasies that people have, and it's all about people's personal experience. Going back to the personal experience thing, people still have personal experience, yet they deny it. It's between what they want to be true and their personal experience of what they know to be true, and somehow, because it's a fleeting thing, and somehow denying that there may be an end that they don't necessarily want, that will end up happening in the end. They can't deny the fact that something happened to them and they know it happened. And just because it's over and done with doesn't mean it has no value, especially now. It has just as much value now as it has then. But emotional strength, I'm going off on a tangent, I apologize. I'm trying to get these points out as decent as possible. But there's also just flat out ignorance, and the emotional strength thing is a concept you can associate with denial and trying to convince someone of these truths. So yes, it comes through ignorance. Obviously, people mix these two things up, and I think it has a lot to do with confusing different concepts and ideas. Their ignorance leads to a conclusion that they may. Their ignorance leads to a. Obviously, the conclusions that you may come out of reality are obviously emotionally distressing, and they're not necessarily pleasant to the senses, especially when you've lived in a fantasy world and you haven't really accepted it. Even though you may know it in your personal experience, it's just too much, I guess, to bring into a philosophical discussion when you're discussing the truth and almost in a way ignoring your personal experience and what it tells you. I think that can be painful to most people, and that's why most people, the vast majority of people, don't get it. So yeah, these emotional things are obviously important and something obviously you have to overcome. And the emotional can obviously lead people to deluded opinions and ignorant opinions because it's confused them so much. And I think that's what a lot of people do in these arguments, is that they get confused by their own denial so much that they end up they end up arguing for the denial, confusing it, not necessarily arguing against having no fantasy and including in an argument like this, but it's something that can lead and confuse people. And I think emotional strength, things that can, taking culpability for your actions and understanding that that what you're living in does have consequences, and you have to consider and take in all the knowledge that you can to take responsibility for yourself and the decisions you make, and not to deny things that are obviously important. And I know people can make these connections. They obviously know that everything they do has a consequence, and most of this stuff has to do with the basics of reality that we're living in. Everything can be presented to them just by their personal experience. And it's something that I think is an argument that people that don't want to understand this need to get a grasp on, I guess. And I guess there's an analogy that I want to go with this, I think, and it has to do with like a song or a movie. You can watch it 100 times, you can watch it over and over again, and you can still miss something. And when you realize that the only thing that changes is in your head, your perception, and the movie's still the same. You just recognized, you discovered something different. Nothing's changed, and where it did change is in your perception. The game is still the same. It's just your reality, your discovery, and I would say that that's what life is. I don't know if this is the exact way I wanted to describe this analogy, but it's something I wanted to at least shoehorn in this video to give an idea of. I know it's been quite incoherent at this point, but it's just an add-on video, I think, and I think it's important to consider overcoming the emotional strength and describing that when it comes to these arguments. When you're trying to deal with someone that's denying the truth, you have to consider these things, and it's just pointing out different types of, it's like emotional weakness, and the amount of emotional strength you have. I think if you're weak emotionally, you can't accept the truth even though it's right in front of you. That's a kind of ignorance, a kind of stupidity, and I think a lot of people have that, and that can lead to either delusions themselves, or not necessarily delusions, but ignorance. And I think they can feed off of each other. Ignorance, flat out ignorance, and denial can feed off of each other based off emotional weakness. Emotional weakness of not accepting the truth can lead to denial, and then denial can lead to ignorance, and the ignorance can feed off the denial, and it can go back and forth. I think it's something that you have to consider if you're going to argue these points, and come at it from a sensitive point of view on a person's level, so they know that you're not insulting them or insulting their intelligence when pointing out these things. I think that's good. I'm just doing it off the top of my head. I think I explained everything I needed to explain, and I can always come back and explain something else in another video, but I do appreciate it. I think I did mention all the points that I have, and I think that's it. I think that is it. I might add something new to a video, to this idea later, but it's something that you have to consider. I keep saying you have to consider, but it's something that's important when it comes to these arguments, and the idea of the recognition of people's perception and how that can control them, and how things can change based off of a person's emotional sensibilities. And we're always offending sensibilities in the world that we live in, because there's just too many people. Everything affects everything, and it's something that you have to be careful and react appropriately or as responsibly as you can, I guess. I apologize for going on for so long. I think that's all I need to say, and I appreciate you for watching, I think. And have a good day, and bye-bye.